Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week we have a Group 3 race, which means it's going to be one of the more balanced races. However, there are still two cars that dominate the leaderboard, so let's bite back. As per usual, the Group 3 class is pretty balanced, but we're still seeing the Mazda RX Vision and the M6 dominate the boards, holding 60 of the places together. Now, we know that this just in, we're getting word that there's going to be a complete change to the Gran Turismo 7 physics. That means that the meta car and, of course, the anti-meta car are probably going to be different. We'll keep you up to date on any changes. Back to the show. I couldn't quite crack the top 100 with the Corvette, however, its in-race performance is better than its time trial performance, so let's get into it. Even though it wasn't that great in the time trial itself, during the race, it's a different story. I really like how it follows cars, which is really important with the dirty air, especially through the death chicane, and I love how it goes over the curbs, which is extremely important in the death chicane. That's one of the reasons most people crash. It's not necessarily the speed or the walls, it's the combination of those, plus the curves that can throw your car sideways. The Corvette goes over them really nicely. Like always, I'm going to upload this video using the tags AMMC, Anti-Meta, and TyrannoCyrusRex. You can also use the meta car to qualify, but use the anti-meta car just for the race. Anyways, leading up to turn 1, we're going to look for this 100 meter board. I like to move onto the curbing while braking, but making sure not to go onto the really high part on the outer edge. When we get to the 50 meter board, that's when I'm going to start turning in, and we want to tuck it in, get really tight to the corner, but make sure we don't use all of the curb on the inside because it's really slippery. Track out as much as you can, again paying attention not to go on the super high part of the curb. That can grab your car and make it go really sideways. Make sure you also get back on the tarmac before exiting the curb so you don't get your car stuck in the grass. Coming out of the tunnel, I get a little bit away from the wall so that I can then get closer when I get closer to the turn-in point, so I'm going more in a straight line and I can maximize the amount of road that I use. Right before the 50 meter board is when I start to turn in. We want to keep turning in once we pass the apex of the first left. That gives us enough room and a good enough approach angle to make it through the death chicane without hitting the wall. Now pay very close attention to my throttle. I'm going to be slightly on the throttle. If I lift off the throttle all the way, it's going to put too much weight towards the front and make the car unpredictable over the curbs. Leaving a little bit of throttle allows us to keep more momentum, and it also allows the car to be more balanced over the curbs. One of the reasons that people end up crashing over those curbs is because they do too much to upset the balance of the car. If you can keep the car from moving too far forward or too far back and transferring too much weight, then you can keep the car running smoothly over the curbs. The same goes with your steering. If you do too much steering angle, you can make the car really catch the curbs and send it off flying in a weird direction. Our next focus is the 50 meter board on the right. We want to brake hard before then, and we're going to aim for this part of the wall right here. When we get to that point, we want to be fully off the brakes and turning in. Now, this is really hard. The most important thing here is getting a really solid exit. Momentum is of course really important, but if you carry too much momentum, you can bounce off the inner curb or the outer curb, and the tall part of this outer curb is incredibly dangerous. So again, focus entirely on your exit, especially if you feel that your angle isn't right. Make sure you hit the inside on this kink right here. You'll lose a lot of time if you set up for the next corner before that. We're going to look for the 50 meter board on the left, but probably more importantly is the marks on the road. We're going to look for the long streaks on the left and also this mark right here in the center. If you can align yourself between those or just get used to where those are in relation to where this curb is, you're going to be able to aim for that curb a lot more accurately. Continue turning right until you're approximately at the orange part of the barrier on the left. Now when you do turn left, don't center the wheel first. Go all the way steering right to all the way steering left. And that doesn't mean do it super quickly. If you do it too fast, you're going to transfer the weight too quickly and you're actually going to lose grip. You'll probably induce understeer. When you get to the end of the red part on the left, that's when we're going to turn in, and you actually want to slow down a little bit more because this is the tightest part of the S's. The run to the next corner isn't super long, so it's more important to keep a good amount of momentum going through the S's entirely rather than sacrifice, go all the way wide there and get a really good exit going here. That doesn't mean you should go slow. It just means that you should focus more on keeping your speed up through the entire thing rather than focusing entirely on the exit. Approaching the next corner, we're going to look for the 50 meter board, but we're going to brake before it at the beginning of the curb here. And when we turn in, we want to turn in a little bit earlier because it is a downhill corner. Once you get onto that curb, you want to get on the throttle as soon as possible, but not too quickly. The car can slide there pretty easily, and if you slide onto the high part of that curb, you're going to go into the dirt. Up next, we're going to look at the beginning of the curbing here on the right. That's when I like to brake. I like to move onto the curb as I brake and then trail brake down onto this downhill section, making sure I don't get too much of that high part of the curb. Aim for about 2 car widths left of the next apex. You can actually use the lines, the tire marks that are on the ground right there, and turn in a little bit early. Of course, if you turn in too early, you're going to go over the curb and who knows what happens. It's the same with the exit curb. All of these curbs can be really unpredictable. You can try to straddle them all the way, you can try to go straight through them, but I like to just use the lower part of the curbs for safety. And that was our lap. Please feel free to ask me any questions about the lap, but let's watch it in full speed now. Starting off in the middle of the track, we're going to look for the 100-meter board, brake up on the curb, hug this really tightly, making sure not to use too much of that curb, and then track out, again, making sure not to use the high part of the curb. The curbs here are really crazy, and the update that's coming out is supposedly going to change that, hopefully for the better. Leading up to the backwards edition of the famous death chicane, we're going to try to use as much of the track as we can and try to be gentle on that throttle, making sure we don't lift off too much, we don't brake at all when we're not following someone. And of course, going into this corner, we're going to get that late apex, and we're going to try to focus entirely on getting enough momentum to make it up the hill with a lot of speed. It's really important that we hug this little kink right here, because if we go too wide, we're going to waste a lot of time, and if we're actually in the race there, we can lose a whole position. Using those marks on the ground and not going all the way to the side of either of these corners, we're just going to keep our momentum, decelerate for just the last one, and try to make it as smooth as we possibly can, avoiding the grass. Paying special attention to the elevation, we're going to turn in a little bit earlier than usual because it is a downhill corner, and making sure we don't get on the throttle too hard there because the car can really easily slide out. Now, the final chicane sequence is pretty tough. It's all about getting a rhythm and not transferring the weight too hard because you can make your car drift really easily here. Another thing to consider, like I've been saying for the past 10 or so minutes, is avoiding those really tall curbs. The high outside edge of those curves can really grab your car and make it do unpredictable things, and so I find it better just to avoid them in general. I'm actually really excited to show you the race that I did with the Corvette. It is a really good anti-meta car. I had such a terrible time trying to record these races that I actually got my main British account completely reset, so I had to pull out this old account. My nickname was still the same as my British account, but I wasn't sure if anyone was going to recognize it, especially since this is a Finnish account. I haven't even used it since GT Sport. I actually used this account so I could have clean races because people treat me a little bit differently when they recognize me. Sometimes people just give me positions when they shouldn't, but a lot of times I just get rammed because I don't think people like the whole racing from the back thing all the time. Either way, I used this account just to practice, and now I had to try to use it for a racing from the back kind of situation. I was kind of nervous, but we were in top split EMEA in the pretty early morning, and I was really happy to see Mehdi right in front of me and Flash Dagger a few positions ahead. A really big shout out to Mehdi. He's been helping me figure out what the anti-meta cars are, and he's been doing a lot of testing for me. I really appreciate you, buddy. Thank you very much. Now, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to beat him, especially in this car, so my entire plan right from the beginning was just follow him through the pack as much as I possibly could, which kind of went awry as he immediately got caught up in a little bit of a situation right there. I knew it wouldn't be too long before he got ahead of me, but I just wanted to stay clean through here, follow this guy, and when I did get closer to the death chicane, I started lifting off. As you can see, it didn't help much, unfortunately. I really should have known he was going to make a mistake there, but I just couldn't avoid it. So as I tried to get back on, I accidentally jumped off the curb, bumped that guy into the wall, and decided I'm just going to slow down here. I'm going to let these guys behind me pass me. I'm not going to cause any more issues. Maybe if they can get a good, clean run, then we can kind of reset. And that's exactly what happened, luckily. As predicted, Mehdi was easily in front of me and right on the tail of the other driver. I had some damage, but I was really hoping that with the traffic, they weren't going to be able to run away, and I was going to be able to catch up to them and at least stay in his slip for a little bit to try to use that to help me get through the crowd. Luckily, my car had healed itself by this point, and there was still a really big crowd in front of them, and Mehdi was definitely going to be able to run away from me, but they were going to slow him down just enough that hopefully I could stay in his slip and make some moves that way. As you can see, that driver was a victim of oversteering off into the dirt, And rather than try to make it really dangerous here, I decided to just push Medi because I thought he had enough space to keep the momentum going and not overshoot that braking zone, and it worked out perfectly. Since this is a tire race and we're starting at the back, we want to use the harder compound, so as we're trying to battle our way through traffic, we're not really wasting the softer compound. It can destroy the tires as well as just not allow you to really use the tires. If you use the softer tires when you're in the back and you're using it just to pass traffic, it's a risky strategy. If you can get cleanly past everyone, the softer tires of course will help you do so. But if you get caught in traffic and you get in situations where you can't cleanly get past people, you're just going to completely waste your opportunity for a faster stint on the softer compound. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of the brakes when you're following people. The dirty air is going to make it a lot harder for you to get through there without any brakes, in fact. The primary function of the brake is obviously to slow yourself down. However, a really good secondary function of the brake, as well as the throttle, is to keep the balance of the car where you want it. A little bit of brake at the right time can be better than a lot of lift, and it can allow you to get on the throttle earlier than if you were just to lift, and it can make for sharper changes in what you're trying to do. Anyways, luckily I had a run on that driver because if we had to go side by side through this sector, we were both going to end up really slow. Now, I did not enter it correctly because I wasn't quite sure I was going to get in front of him, so I unfortunately went really slow. I think he was trying to pass me here. I wasn't trying to block, I was just trying to follow Medi, but he did end up hitting me in the back, which was beneficial for me. I was able to keep up my momentum, he wasn't able to take my position, and I think I did have better pace than him, so I was able to really make a gap pretty easily. It's really so impressive watching a driver like Medi. He's directly behind the cars he's just waiting to make a move on. As I'm trying to chase him, it's pretty clear that I'm struggling just to stay in his slipstream, while he's just always directly on the butt of the car in front. This does, however, give me an opportunity to showcase the Corvette. The Corvette, when in slipstream, is incredibly powerful, and so even though there was a half-second gap, or maybe even more, I was able to get a lot closer to them by the next braking point. I thought the M6 behind me made a huge mistake and was going to run into me, but no, he braked at the perfect time, and I think it really showcases why the M6 is the meta car here. It can brake incredibly late compared to the Corvette. Now, this was a pretty scary situation, but I knew if I had any chance of sticking with these guys, I was going to have to be pretty aggressive here, so I decided to trust the Mercedes, stay as close as I could through there, and I really did benefit from that. None of them made a mistake. I was able to stay really close, and luckily for me, but not luckily for Medi, he did end up hitting him. It looks like he immediately lifted just to, I guess, apologize for that, which I benefited from in the end. And so we were back right behind Medi again. Leading up to the S's, you'll see that I definitely missed the first apex, and that's partially because of the dirty air, partially because I just missed. But even though I had a really bad line throughout the entirety of the S's, the Corvette's really powerful, the Corvette's really agile, and I was able to stay with them at least enough to stay within the slipstream. This is when I started getting a little bit worried. Seeing Medi go for that move meant that he was going to have a run and not have to worry about this Supra, unless the Supra is able to stick with him, but I was pretty sure he was just going to be able to get in front of the Supra and run away. Now, things got a little chaotic. I wasn't sure if the Supra was going to try to take his position back, and that Merc tried to take my position, but luckily the Supra wasn't able to get in front of Medi. They kind of came together, and I was able to just get straight through pretty cleanly. In a perfect world, I would have had enough of a run to get in front of Medi to give him the slip and then move to the outside or the inside to then hopefully defend my position and then take off cleanly. But that really aggressive Merc was in the mix, and so I just tried to make sure that I stayed on the outside, didn't mess with anyone's line, and Medi was able to get that position back pretty quickly. I don't think anyone doubted that. You know what's really fun about the death chicane? It's never not scary, especially when you're close. I lifted a little bit, but not enough to let that Mercedes get too close, and I just did my best to keep it clean. I was really happy with that one. That felt really clean. I don't think I lost too much time from Medi, but we really lost that pack behind us. So now it was just about doing everything I could to manage my tires, don't slide too much, and just try to stick with Medi. I couldn't believe he was able to take that line going over the curb like that. I would definitely crash, and I actually did. In the first race of the night, I tried to take that exact line and spun directly into that wall. I'd kind of readjusted from the previous lap, so I was able to hit the S's pretty nicely. I was pretty proud of these ones. Even though I was really proud, look at him go. Look at the gap now. At this point, I had kind of considered trying to do an undercut And not so I could pass him, but so I would have more of an opportunity to stick within his slip, because I was pretty sure he was going to be out of the slipstream range by the straight. But once again, I was pretty happy with my performance here, and I was able to stick with him just long enough and just close enough that I still had the slipstream effect going onto the big straight. So like always, I like to showcase the strength of the anti-meta car. We're a little bit more than 7/10 behind him at the beginning of this straight, and so we'll look again when we get to the end of it. I hadn't actually been paying attention to the position I was in. I didn't realize until now I was in 6th place, and that was before the pit stop. When you're on a hard compound first strategy, and you're able to pass a lot of people before the pit stop in a one-stop kind of race, that means that most likely the people in front of you are going to be on a harder compound while you're on the really fast soft compound, and then you can really attack for the last stint of the race. Seeing a yellow flag as you're entering the death chicane is never fun. You never know if there's going to be a car stopped, or even if it is ghosted, if it's going to be moving just enough to unghost as you're about to reach it. That is one of the really scary things about it, but luckily we made it through cleanly. Now you notice the car in front of Medi is the R30 Skyline. That car was a lot of fun, and if you don't know, it is incredibly good on tire wear. I have another race that I might be able to make a video of later this week where I did the most massive undercut I think I've ever done in the history of Gran Turismo Sport and Gran Turismo 7. It was really incredible, so that is another option if you want to have a really good strategy. We'll talk more about that later. Speaking of strategy, it looks like Medi set himself up 2 corners before so we can get in front of this guy before this corner, and it worked beautifully. I, unfortunately, did not have that forethought or that skill, and I don't know if he didn't see me or if he thought he was giving me enough space, but going on the grass right there really killed my momentum. We are now on lap 5, and that is the perfect lap to go into the pits. I was trying everything I could to get in front of him, and I thought I might be able to when he shifted, but he got such a good exit that it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't get in front of him before the line. I almost actually gave myself a penalty, but snuck in right behind him right at the last second. Now, I don't know if it's just the compound change, because he was already on the softs moving to mediums. I was on the mediums moving to softs, but you can actually see that I'm already in front of him according to the standings before we go fully into the pits. I didn't notice that at the point, so this was a really great surprise to me. I came out in front of him. Now, I've seen that happen before, but I'd never seen it happen where I was in front of the person before the pits. So I'm not sure if that was just a glitch or if that's how it always works, but that was a very pleasant surprise. So once again, the mission was to just stick with Medi as much as I possibly could. This chicane is so stressful that I genuinely count down how many times I have to just survive it as my way of trying to keep myself pumped up for the race. I'm like, all right, we're on lap 6. We just have to make it to lap 10. We just have to get through it 4 more times after this. We can do this. It was after this corner that, since we were on a straight, I was able to kind of assess the situation. There are 2 people really close within striking distance of Medi, and it was right before the S's, which are really difficult to pass on. So I was hoping that despite the fact that he had a massive gap on me already, that was going to close up again if I could really nail this sector again. Some people think that the slipstream is in effect when you are 1.5 seconds behind the person ahead. But most of us agree that if that is the case, then it is strongest when you were just 1 second behind the person ahead. So we were at 1.3 during the S's, and once we got through here, it looked pretty obvious that he was going to be slowed down just enough, so I just focused on doing this as perfectly as I possibly can. That's actually one thing that I tell a lot of people when they ask for advice when it comes to pace. A lot of people try to drive fast, and obviously we're all trying to drive fast, but what I focus on more is just trying to drive correct. How correctly can I place the car? How correctly can I get on the throttle? How correctly can I trail brake? Just trying to do everything as correctly and as precisely as you can will often yield the best results. Just as I was hoping, a lap before, the 2 people that Medi had to pass had slowed him down just enough that I was able to get within a half second again. So we had the slipstream effect. We unfortunately also had dirty air because of it, and once again, just 4 more times through the death chicane. This is another situation like I mentioned before. Medi is right behind that guy, and I'm struggling just to keep up with him at all. I wasn't exactly sure when he was going to make his move, but this really surprised me. Last second, dives on the inside, keeps it clean. The guy had room, and when he's fully in front of him, uses all of the track, even goes and straddles the high part of the curb. I have no clue how he can make that work so often. I always make the car slide out. It was probably inspired by that, but I had to go for my own move right then. Luckily, I didn't make any contact with him. He gave me space. He knew I was going to go for it, and I really wouldn't have made a dive like that, except I was absolutely certain that he was on the medium compound, and being on absolutely fresh softs, after watching what Medi did, I thought I could possibly pull off something like that. And I was really happy that I was able to get by cleanly. And then once again, I was still within Medi's slipstream. I believe this is the first time in the entire race where he's had a completely clear track ahead of him. And with that, certainly it's not going to be long before he can just disappear off in the distance. But luckily I was able to stay within the 1 second barrier, and I was able to stay within the slipstream. And of course the Corvette was just going to do all the work for me at that point. These long straights are a good opportunity to look at the track map, see where the other people that you're going against are, and kind of evaluate what your strategy will be. I don't have much of an option but to just try to chase down Medi, and then of course, if we're lucky, we'll be able to catch the first place guy. But I did realize at that point that the first place guy was so far ahead that unless he made a really massive mistake, there was no way we were going to catch him. Looking up at the timing on the top left, you can see that I'm 14 seconds behind him with only 2 laps after this one to go, so it was pretty much impossible without him making a big crash somewhere. And however, with the death chicane, that's always possible, but as much as it's possible for him to make that kind of mistake, it's also possible for me to make that kind of mistake. At this point, he's still within that 1 second range, and this isn't exactly a long straight, but I'm still able to use just a little bit of that slipstream to make sure that I can stay a little bit close to him. You may have noticed that I was getting the purple sectors, which meant that I was on track to get the fastest lap, but with the fact that he's pulling away from me, he certainly was about to get that fastest lap instead of me. I was driving about as well as I possibly could. I was doing everything I could to stay within 1 second of him, so that by the time we get to that long straight, then I was going to be able to catch up a little bit closer with the slipstream and the power of the Corvette. But as you can see, that time slipped a little bit more than 1 second away. Like I said before, some of us think that the slipstream effect is actually a little bit more than 1 second away. At least a little bit, but the really strong slipstream effect is under 1 second. And when I looked up at the timing, I realized I was just barely under that 1 second threshold. I was so happy that I was going to be able to stick with him at least to one more corner. And there's absolutely no surprise that he pulled off the fastest lap of the race at that point. I was still happy, however, that I would have gotten the fastest lap had he not been present. But of course, if he hadn't been present, then maybe I wouldn't have actually made it. Maybe I wouldn't have had that extra time because I wouldn't have that slipstream. Here we were approaching the penultimate death chicane of the race. I was probably holding my breath at this point, but I was still trying to be really brave, make sure that I can carry as much speed as I could, do it as well as I possibly could. And as much as I should have just kept my head down and focused on my lines and focused on my pace, I definitely had to look up and see that he put 2/10 on me just through the death chicane. At this point, I pretty much knew that it was over. I knew it was over before, but the dream of staying within his slipstream was pretty much over at this point too. So even though the Corvette is like over a second, at least my time is over a second slower than the world-class time such as Medi's time in the time trial, I was really happy that I was putting together a pretty good lap during the race and keeping up a pretty consistent, pretty good pace. That was actually, as I say that was consistent, that was the slowest second sector that I had done the entire race. But at this point, the tires were wearing and I was mentally fatigued, honestly. Trying to keep up with him is really, really exhausting. There's something that a lot of really fast drivers like to do, is certainly he knows that he's not going to catch the guy who's 14 seconds ahead. And he probably doesn't want to run alone. And there's no way that I caught 8/10 on him in that last sector, especially considering the fact that my lap was bad. He definitely slowed down just so we can continue playing, continue that game of cat and mouse. Maybe he was giving me another chance to see if I can keep up with him, but I really appreciate that kind of thing. Some people don't like it when like you slow down to let other people catch up and race, but honestly, it's just fun. It's a lot of fun when people do that, so we can continue the game that we've been playing for the last 10 laps. And here's the final death chicane. I knew if I could make it through here, I'd be really happy with myself, and there it is. 10 in a row, we survived the death chicane. I do think our leader suffered some kind of misfortune through the death chicane because he was a full second ahead of where he is now. He's now at 13.3. When we were crossing the finish line for the last lap, he was at 14.3. So I'm not sure if he crashed or if his tires finally gave out or what, but it was pretty cool to see that. The funny thing about this race is I was explicitly doing it so I could get footage for this video. I was so happy to have gotten a really good race, especially after spending the last couple of hours doing nothing but bad races, getting my other account reset and being able to do this race with Medi and push through the pack with him. I believe I started 15th and he was 14th. And now to finish on the podium with him felt really awesome. I was really satisfied after having a really rough night trying to get the right footage for this. And along with that, I was really happy that I had chosen the Corvette. I drive a Corvette in real life, and so being able to use essentially my real life car, or a version of it, to make a non-meta guide felt really good. And speaking of non-meta, that crazy update that's coming out, I'm really excited to see what we can bring you guys. Once again, thank you for watching my anti-meta guide. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask in the comments below. If you like what you saw, please leave a like, a subscribe, shout it from the rooftops, tell all of your friends, all that good stuff, because I will be making a new guide every single week that there is a meta to fight. Now, with the update that's coming out, we're not quite sure what to expect. It looks like it's a complete physics overhaul, so that's actually pretty exciting when it comes to figuring out what the new meta is, and of course, what the new anti-meta is. Until next time, thank you.